How can the Baltimore Ravens save their 2023 offseason after a lackluster start? We talk about that, dive into the Ravens' moves they've made recently, talking about the Lamar Jackson situation, and so much more coming up next here on this episode of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire, and we're here as always on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much as always for tuning in with us today, making us your first listen each and every day here on Locked On Ravens. It is free to subscribe both in audio and video form. So on YouTube, you can hit the subscribe button. On Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, it is free to subscribe. So be sure to support the show, support the channel. I appreciate all the support for the show. And today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by the all-new, all-electric 2023 Nissan Ariya. Nissan Ariya, the EV for people who love to drive. Learn more at nissanusa.com. We're back. It is a Purple Friday. This is the first week of free agency. It'll officially be in the books, at least for the weekday versions of that after today. There have been 4 days of free agency for the Ravens, and there hasn't really been a whole lot going on for Baltimore as they continue to navigate through the Lamar Jackson situation. And here to talk about all that and, of course, more with me and how the Ravens can save this offseason is Qadry Ismail, a former Baltimore Ravens wide receiver and a Super Bowl champion. And Q, I know a lot of people right now frustrated with the lack of moves Baltimore has made. In fact, they have not signed an external free agent. They made a couple of re-signings here and there. But to me, Q, this was honestly the expected outcome, not the one I wanted, but the expected outcome with the Lamar Jackson situation still in limbo.
Yeah, I think that's the operative word, limbo. The fact that Lamar Jackson hasn't signed, you really don't know where you're at when it comes to your salary cap, and you really don't know from a full-on direction of your offense. So outside of some guys that you know you'll have on your team, there really hasn't really been a need, although I'm sure there's going to be a need, but there hasn't been a need to talk about signing anybody else until we see what happens with number 8.
Yeah, and to me, that's where it starts. And Q, I wanted us today, at least in this first segment, to go over how the Ravens can save this offseason, because right now, as I've kind of talked about, free agency is such a touch and go thing where, you might have 5 or 6 plans or multiple different plans if you're Eric DeCosta and John Harbaugh. But the reality is that these things happen really fast. Contracts can get signed. Teams can swoop in at the last minute. And if you don't know how much money you can allocate to X position or to Y position, it can get a bit tricky. So I wanted to talk about how we can envision this team saving their offseason, especially, again, after they haven't really done a ton over these first 4 days here. And I put out, it was right before free agency, I put out a 5-step plan for the Ravens in terms of what my ideal offseason would be. And to me, Q, I don't think the Ravens offseason is completely sunk if they don't sign Lamar to an extension or find a trade, but it would really, really help if they're able to figure out just what direction they're moving. And to me, that's the most important step if they want to save this offseason, or at least have the best shot to save this offseason and open up as much money as possible.
Yeah, so if we look at Lamar Jackson being signed, is it going to be a guy like the likes of Odell Beckham Jr., who the Ravens say that they're very much interested in, as well as other teams? Is it going to be, yes, the efforts towards the draft of getting, wide receivers that are going to be in the mix? You're going to need, the wide receivers anyway, but it takes on a different focus when you do have your quarterback signed. Without all that, again, it's a vagary. It's a, well, we have this money, but we're not sure what it's going to look like when it comes to the guarantees or not guarantees, or what, is going to be put into escrow with the franchise tag, the non-exclusive franchise tag. If in fact it is a scenario where, Gardner Minshew, bless his heart, but he ain't Lamar Jackson. And so if the Colts are going to be sitting there and thinking, well, we probably got a good backup in Gardner, we'll figure it out because he was with Philly, and we know what he did with Jalen Hurts as a starter. okay, he could come right in, plug in. We're gonna go ahead and get Lamar. Now that changes things up for what the Ravens are going to do when it comes to not only free agency, but in my mind, it looks like from a quarterback aspect of things, it's not a very quarterback rich draft. And so you're going to have to be figuring out some maneuvering and figuring out who really is that guy that you're going to hang your hat on and make the fan base believe that you're in a better position now than you were in the Lamar Jackson era when he was on the team. So there's the moving parts. That's exactly what this offseason is. This is one of, if not the most volatile offseason I have witnessed from the Ravens in possibly their history.
Right. And the Ravens, they're not a team, and they really haven't ever been, that's going to go out there and all of a sudden be super, super aggressive during the first couple of days of free agency. I mean, we saw it a tad last year with Marcus Williams and Morgan Moses, but usually we have to wait a couple of days for them to really get going. They let the market develop. And this year, Q, to me, I know the wide receiver position, you talked about that. It's something that a lot of people want to see the team really look at, really add some talent into it, especially after how the last couple of years have gone. And in my kind of 5-step plan, I put out there trading for DeAndre Hopkins. I know we've talked about the potential of trading for a DeAndre Hopkins. Now, again, I think if you're able to sign Lamar to an extension or figure out what that situation is, it helps you with all different moves, including a trade like that. I know guys like Courtland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy have been names that are popular. On the free agent market, you still have guys like an Odell or an Adam Thielen or DJ Chark. To me, I think, though, DeAndre Hopkins could be this guy that I think, with all the frustration that we've seen, if there's a notification today or tomorrow or the next day that says the Ravens have traded for DeAndre Hopkins for a 3rd round pick or a 3rd and a 4th round pick, Q, I think, to me, the whole fan base, all that frustration, all that anger will be wiped away. And that all of a sudden, I think, would turn into excitement.
Agreed. I think that's what we look at. And the grand picture of it all is the name that says, hey, we're committed to winning. The name that says his resume talks about the opportunity to come up clutch in big games. The coming up clutch factor hasn't been there, obviously, the last 2 years where Lamar has been out and we hadn't had that clutch guy to really show out on the offense side of the ball. So, if it is D-Hop, bruh, woo, I don't know if it's like all forgiven, but I know one thing that would put a lot of people at like ease of like, all right, we're listening. We haven't totally, burned down the house and forsaken all things Ravens. So I think, there's opportunity there to restore order, but it needs to be aggressive. It needs to be a big splash. Obviously, the biggest splash is getting LJ back in the building. But a free agent, yes, the likes of DeAndre Hopkins, that's a game changer.
Yeah, and things kind of go hand in hand when you're talking about, to me at least, the 2 biggest needs, which are wide receiver and corner. And to me, my ideal offseason plan for them, Q, was to be able to trade or sign that number 1, the guy who can be that guy, that dude. And then for the corner position, I think re-signing Marcus Peters to a team-friendly deal would be solid to have, is that like corner 3, maybe high-end corner 2. And then you go into the draft and you draft one of, there could be 8, 9, 10 first-round corners because the class is so deep. You go in there, and if you have a corner room of Marlon Humphrey, Marcus Peters, and whatever corner you bring in that first round, to me, I think for a room that right now there are real big questions outside of Marlon Humphrey. I mean, there was the flirtation on Wednesday with Darius Slay that lasted about 4 hours with Marlon Humphrey, and everybody got so excited. And I said, imagine that secondary with Marlon Humphrey and Darius Slay and Marcus Williams and Kyle Hamilton. But to me, Q, I think if you're re-signing Marcus Peters and if you're drafting a first-round corner, I still think that is a fine offseason corner-wise. What do you think?
Yeah, no, oh my goodness. I mean, I am a high affinity, I should say, fan when it comes to Marcus Peters and what he brings to the team. I think his energy, his talent, and just his abilities, when healthy, is second to none. I think he motivates Marcus Peters, gives the swagger, if you will, to Marlon Humphreys. I think they play off each other extremely well. You said about the depth of the draft, and this is going to be one of the more challenging drafts because it's not that many picks. So you got to really, really hone in on, who you feel is going to make a strong impact. Obviously, you also look at the fact that this division is a receiver strong division. So you need some dudes. I know we know you get into shootouts, and that's today's NFL. It's funny. You can have a 28-35 game or a 17-10 game. I mean, people are like, "Oh my God," but it's the same. However, yes, you did have some excitement as far as putting the ball into the end zone. I think with a strong secondary, and it's again going into this division with Pickens and obviously T. Higgins and Jamar Chase and Amari Cooper, all those guys are just studs. I think the main thing is that you get a stop, get two stops. Fourth quarter, give the ball back to your offense, something along those lines. That's where, like, yes, the free agency element of it all, the mental swagger of like, yeah, this is the Ravens, this is what they do, even if it is, like I said, 35-28. Okay, so what? We gave ourselves a chance in the fourth quarter to put away the game, and it just took one play and it happened.
Yeah, and those two, wide receiver and corner, when you're talking about shootout and stops, those two positions, with the way this has gone, the way the NFL has gone to the big passing offenses, you're throwing it 30, 40 times a game. You need to have wide receivers that can make big plays. You need to have corners that can stop those big plays. And for the Ravens, those just happen to be their two biggest needs. So coming up in our second segment, we'll continue to talk about a plan for the Ravens and a lot more still coming up here on Locked On Ravens. But first, this episode is brought to you by Built Bar. And the Built March Madness bracket is here. We know you have a favorite bar or a puff, and now is your time to make it count. Go to BuiltMarchMadness.com to vote for your favorites. For me, I'll be voting for the Brownie Batter Puff. And if you want the Ravens to win, you better be voting for that bar too. Support your team, support your bar or your puff. And when you vote your favorite bar or puff, you'll be entered into a drawing where 50 lucky Locked On listeners will get a free box of Built. And not only that, but one Locked On fan will win a 12-month subscription to Built to have Built's best bars or puffs delivered monthly straight to your door. You have to try Built. Built is the best protein bar ever. And seriously, they're so amazing you won't even think they're good for you because they taste that good. What makes Built bars and puffs so good is, for starters, they're all high in protein, low in sugar, and covered in 100% real chocolate. That's right, real chocolate. Run to BuiltMarchMadness.com right now to vote your favorite bar or puff and pick up a box when you're there. You can vote every day in March, so hop in and support your pick. We're back here. It's our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still here with Qadry Ismail. And Q, when it comes to the Ravens and what this offseason has been, there hasn't been a lot of activity. Again, they have not signed anyone from outside of their organization. They're one of very few teams. In fact, they might be the only team at this point to not have any external free agents signed. But we talked about wide receiver, and I think a trade for DeAndre Hopkins would definitely be a huge step into saving this offseason. If you're able to re-sign Marcus Peters, draft a corner, that would also, and there's still time for that. There are still wide receivers on the market. There are still corners on the market. But then it becomes, if you're able to add depth pieces along the margins, it may be some sneaky needs here and there. And the Ravens have a couple of those that have popped up over the past couple of days because they've lost Ben Powers. They've lost Josh Oliver. They've released Calais Campbell. To me, Q, I think saving this offseason, a lot of fans would be happy if Calais Campbell was brought back. Now, Eric DeCosta didn't rule out a reunion during his statement that he put out when the release was official, but Calais Campbell texted Josina Anderson, and that text wasn't a positive step in the direction that I wanted it to be in terms of if he could come back or not. Seemed more like he was closing a chapter and opening up another one. Were you surprised the Ravens went that direction and moved on?
I kind of wasn't. I think, that's where you put in a call to a guy like a Travis Jones and be like, yo, bro, time for you to grow up. And you're going to grow up a lot faster than what you thought. I think, with Washington and Matabike and even Michael Pierce getting his contract reworked. I mean, it's like, yo, y'all, we believe in y'all. We showing y'all we believe in y'all. Now prove us right. So that's okay. Where you're going to look at your salary cap, you're going to look at the structure of what's going on. I'm sure he's like, all right, I'm not mad at you. I know it's business, but for darn sure, I am not going to be sitting there and acting like, oh, it's okay. I'm just going to go ahead and do nothing now. Yeah, again, there could be another team out there. Shoot, who's our boy? Brandon Williams. Brandon got himself a ring, so he was ready. And Calais could very well be in that position where he could pick and choose, and he doesn't have to go through a training camp to get himself ready. When you that many years in the league, you're not doing a whole heck of a lot to get yourself ready physically or mentally. You already know. Your body has already been there, done that, been in those situations. So again, I for one am grateful for the opportunity to cover, Calais and watch him as far as, epitomizing what it's like to be in a Raven. But at the same time, if he comes back, cool. If he doesn't, I definitely understand. That's a part of the business of football.
Yeah, and obviously, wishing the best, whatever happens, whatever the next chapter is. But he obviously still wants to play and can still give a team really good football, even though this is his 16th season. The way he has kind of pushed Father Time to the side and said, "No, this is still my time to play." It's been impressive. So I hope it's back in Baltimore, but if it's not, again, wishing the best for Calais Campbell. But again, I think that you got to add those depth pieces along the margin. So maybe you sign a veteran offensive lineman to compete with Ben Cleveland for that left guard job. Maybe you bring in an edge rusher if it's not a Justin Houston, a corner we talked about, wide receiver. But in terms of those step plans to save this offseason for Baltimore, Q, I think we're in agreement that it starts with Lamar. That's kind of the first step. And then a big splash of wide receiver, and then kind of doing your due diligence at corner, bringing back a Marcus Peters if that's the route you go, and then adding to that depth in the drafts. Does that sound about right for you?
It does. I mean, I think it's your key free agents that you feel are going to help you win games. We talked about that. At the same time, yeah, of course, you know what your draft is going to be. You set your board. Your board better be a good board. This better be your best board setting ever. Like, you better have the most epic of boards that other teams are coveting the board that you are looking at. That's how critical this is. This is like, I can't overstate how incredibly important this year is for this ball club, this offseason. So I say this year, this offseason is to set up going into the season. You best believe NFC or the AFC North, excuse me, the AFC North is not going to take prisoners. In other words, no one is feeling bad about what's going on here in Baltimore. No one cares. And that's where, you're going to have to figure this thing out. It is so all hands on deck when it comes to like pinching every penny. Your best your best to look at the best way possible to put on a product, because of the fact that either you're going to do it with Lamar and it's going to be awesome, or you're going to do it without Lamar and it is got to be darn near perfect.
Yeah, and I think that's also where the frustration probably comes from for a lot of people, where I think a lot of people are in agreement with UQ, and this offseason is so important for them. And they're kind of in this situation, and this is the reality of having an expensive quarterback on the books, where I think a lot of people are under the impression and agree in the fact that the Ravens didn't maximize Lamar's rookie contract to their fullest potential on the offensive side of the ball in terms of getting him a star wide receiver that is, trade piece, and AJ Brown, DK Metcalf, one of those star pure number ones. Obviously, the Bills go out there and get Stephon Diggs, and DeAndre Hopkins goes to Arizona. So that's not what happened. And now the Ravens are in the situation where they're going to have to pay Lamar, $32 million this year on the franchise tag, or 40 plus per year, 50 plus per year. And so that's now how important this offseason is, to build a team or try to build a team either around Lamar or just restarting. But the issue is that they're in such limbo. That's the word we keep coming back to. They're in such limbo that we don't know which direction they're going to go in. I think that hinders them in a lot of different ways. But let's talk about some of the other moves. The Ravens losing Ben Powers to Denver, the Denver Broncos, 4 years, $52 million, a big contract for Ben Powers. Josh Oliver goes to Minnesota, and those Vikings, 3 years, $21 million. I personally, Q, wasn't shocked both of those guys left. I think that Baltimore couldn't afford those contracts either way. But money-wise, year-wise, I was a little surprised. Not that they didn't earn it, but, I think that both those guys, I was thinking maybe 3 years for Ben Powers, 2 for Josh Oliver. Were you kind of shocked when you saw the money in the years?
I think what we are in our bubble here in Baltimore, it's, oh, wow, other teams, they're strapped for cash or whatever it might be when it comes to their salary cap, but they're not. And at the same time, their offenses are different than ours. Okay, so Josh Oliver, I know for the Vikings, they really utilize their tight end. They got a pretty innovative offense. This is not some run-of-the-mill offense. So at the same time, from a bigger picture standpoint, Josh earned the right. You can say what you will about Greg Roman, but get some tight ends paid. And I think there's 10 million reasons why, if I'm Josh Oliver, I'm like, adios, Baltimore. But I'm sure at the same time, I would have also been, putting in a message to both John Harbaugh and Eric DeCosta, being like, yo, appreciate you giving me that opportunity, because it wasn't happening down in Jacksonville. Now, Ben, I think he basically mentally, and it happens differently for everybody, but the game slowed down. The game slowed down for him, and good for him. Not often do we see guys get an opportunity for the game to slow down and you cash in on it. So good. I'm glad. I'm appreciative of both of those guys and what they did for the Ravens. Once a Raven, always a Raven. Then, cool. That's something where I think bigger picture wise, again, everybody has their own salary cap. Everybody is going to spend it the way they want to spend it. And the bottom line is, 2 players, they get a chance to put themselves in position to have a comfortable life. They can live, they might not live like a king for a day, which is actually not a very good idea, but they could live like a prince forever. And that's something that I think is kudos to them for their hard work and opportunities and taking advantage of it.
Yeah, and I give both those guys a ton of credit. Both of them, for a lot of people, myself included, were outside of my final 53-man rosters heading into training camp in the preseason. But look, they worked for it. They worked really hard. They played really good football, and they cashed in on it. Very well deserved for both of those guys. And coming up on our final segment, we'll talk a bit about the Ravens re-signings, who they re-signed, what it means for the team. So be sure to stay tuned. Still a lot more to dive into on Locked On Ravens. But first, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. And the midway point of the NBA season is here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Letting you bet on everything from the money line to point scores and threes drains. And I do have some breaking news here. The Denver Nuggets, they won a basketball game. Finally, the Detroit Pistons, they win that game. So if you bet on Denver to win on FanDuel, probably made some money there. And if you bet on a Nikola Jokic triple-double, you were unfortunately 1 assist short, finished with 30 points, 10 rebounds, and 9 assists, not 10. But there are so many more exclusive bets, like the 2x3, which is 2 3-pointers scored in the first 3 minutes. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance to big up pat with the same game parlay. So don't miss a chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets. You can go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. It's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more. FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. We are back. Our final segment of Locked On Ravens, rounding out our Friday edition episode here with Qadry Ismail. I am Kevin Ostreicher, and while the Ravens haven't signed an outside free agent yet, they have re-signed a couple of their own guys. They bring back Justice Hill on a 2-year deal. They bring back Geno Stone. They bring back Nick Moore as well. three guys who, look, Justice Hill played really well for him in 2022. I think that's a solid third running back. I know there's all the debate about the running back position and why you spending, $4.5 million on a guy for 2 years when you could just take a mid-round guy in the fourth round, and that could be just a rookie on a cheap rookie deal. I think he'll get in. I know a lot of people aren't going to be happy with this, but I think special teams wise, it was real. The gunner aspect for Justice Hill, the Ravens value that. Nick Moore, Pro Bowler, a good long snapper. That's a fine move for me. Geno Stone was important for me, though. I think Geno Stone played really well in the absence of Marcus Williams, started multiple games for them. These are really solid re-signings. I just think people are underwhelmed because that's really all that's happened for him this offseason so far.
Yeah, well, because that's not, that's just standard operating procedure. All right, what do we think about Justice? Call his agent, figure out a deal. Okay, great. Here's what it's looking like. You come into camp, make sure you do your thing. Great. Hallelujah. You got it. Have it. Gino, hey, bro, we appreciate what you did when it came to being ready with the injury to Marcus Williams. Cool, great. All right. That's business as usual. It's the business as usual, mentality when I think, if I'm looking at my YouTube thread, every time it pops up, it's Lamar Jackson. You and I, we every Thursday, what are we talking about? Lamar Jackson. And it's not, that he's occupying the space because we don't have anything else to talk about. He's occupying the space because he is the thing to talk about when it comes to what the Baltimore Ravens, the success of this team hinges upon the fate of Lamar Jackson.
And speaking of Lamar Q, let's talk about Lamar Jackson. We haven't done it really yet, and I have a couple of things I want to run by you here because obviously you're right. It's not just like we're trying to milk every single thing we can out of Lamar for content. Like, that's not what it is. It literally is something new pops up. The situation itself is so polarizing. It's one of the biggest stories in all the NFL right now, if not the biggest. And new stuff happened this week with Lamar on Twitter. Now, Adam Schefter on his show put out, he was reconfirming a report from back in September, which pretty much was he reported Lamar turned down a guaranteed contract of $133 million. That number was bumped to $175 million with injuries. And then there was also that springing guarantee on I think it was the fifth day of the 2026 league year. That number would be guaranteed to go up to 200. So then, the Baltimore Beatdown account put out that, Lamar turned down the $200 million guaranteed. And then Lamar responds with the guy wearing a lot of hats for the cap, saying that's cap. That's not true. And then kind of responded to that and said $133 million over 3 years. And I need an agent with laughing faces. And then says people throw stuff at the wall and, they try to make it stick. So Lamar took to Twitter and within his own right put out contract information. It was a really big deal that he ended up putting out that information. And it's crazy because Eric DeCosta kind of talked about how, Lamar and the Ravens had an agreement where they're not going to put out any information. And everyone's like, well, that's no longer a thing anymore. You're kind of watching this all unfold, Q. What are your reactions to it?
Well, I think it's interesting because from a global picture, you're looking at Lamar Jackson, Justin Herbert. You look at Trevor Lawrence to a degree, Joe Burrow for sure. At some point, Josh Allen again, although he just recently got paid, but that's going to come up again. I promise you that. And missing one other guy, but we'll just keep it with those guys. These guys their agents right now are trying to say, well, what's the parameters that we working with? So it all hinges on Lamar, and Lamar is like, okay, that's fine, but Sean Watson got this, and I don't know where Stephen A. Smith's his reporting comes in from Lamar's camp when Lamar and his mom are the only people in his camp, or, I don't know to the degree of the NFLPA, but, what the Ravens did or didn't do. Plus, at the same time, what was the counter offer that Lamar gave to the Ravens, like in that Twitter thread? That's the bigger picture that I look at. I think this the tweeting element of it all is showing a little bit of I think there is a little bit of frustration. I don't think there's like, I'm depressed or I'm pissed or I'm salty or whatever negative, but there is a little bit of like, you know what, y'all keep on putting out this, and it feels to me like there needs to be more clarity on it all. And I don't know if that was strategic so other teams can get a clue as to what they are working with when it comes to Lamar. But again, some of these teams, they're moving on, whether it be the Raiders, whether it be the Commanders, whether it be, the Jets, all that, but it's this roll of the dice type of a mindset. I think every time, we look at Twitter and seeing whether or not, Lamar said something or how this is all going to look. Very, very interesting in my mind how this is all unfolded.
Yeah, and so Lamar can now talk to other teams. That deadline was, he can start doing it on Wednesday. And I know people have mentioned potential landing spots, maybe the Colts, maybe the Falcons, maybe the Lions or the Texans or something like that. But again, we'll see. It still feels like Baltimore's a very realistic possibility. But as we kind of maneuver over these next couple of days, couple of weeks, however, hopefully it's soon a resolution happens. But we'll see how that situation unfolds. And we actually did get a question here from EnoNeck2960, who says, do you think the NFL's criticisms of Lamar, so the style of play not being sustainable, the injury history, the offensive talent that would only work in the Ravens offense, is the reason that his market has potentially been so quiet? And, he says, I always believed great quarterback play is something every NFL team wanted, but that doesn't seem to be the case, I guess, because losing is still profitable. So when you're talking about just why you think, the market for Lamar has been, I guess, so quiet at this point, do you think it has to do with the injuries, or do you think it has to do with the, do people only think it works in the Ravens offense or the style of play, or do you think it's more because teams don't want to give out the guaranteed money and they have to give up 2 first-round picks on top of it?
It could be all of that, sure. And I think I think if I'm looking at it, it could be the laziness or the scariness of whether or not they, meaning, a team feeling like, man, what is it that we got to change to make, it happen. But I think that's just the insecurity of the coaching staff. And I think, it is a bit risky to go out there and not kick the tires on a franchise quarterback. You did it with Tom Brady. You did it with Peyton Manning. Even though these guys were traditional, but ultimately they started inputting their own offensive plays and play calling and their comfort level. And it was successful. The Broncos and the Buccaneers both have, Super Bowl championships, and because of those free agent quarterbacks. I don't see this being any different with Lamar Jackson.
Yeah, and it's not very often. In fact, it's very, very rare that teams have an opportunity to talk with a franchise quarterback like a Lamar, the skill set that Lamar has. And again, I get it if a team says, if we sign Lamar, it would, take up all the cap space and the fully guaranteed deal and the 2 first-round picks. But with Lamar, you're getting a guy who has proven it time and time again at the NFL level, and you don't really get a lot of that. So I understand where people are coming from with the injuries. I'm not labeling him as injury prone. Again, both those injuries happened in the pocket, throwing the football. This was not a sustainable issue with him running and getting hit and getting hurt that way. He did it throwing the ball. And I think that's also somewhat of a common misconception when talking about Lamar's missed all these games. But let's round out the episode, Q, talk a bit. We'll move away from Lamar. Let's talk about the AFC North, because teams have been making moves in the AFC North, not named the Ravens. I think the biggest one, the most high profile one that people are talking about Orlando Brown, a very familiar face in Baltimore, going to Cincinnati, 4-year deal. He'll be protecting he's protected Lamar Jackson, that Patrick Mahomes, and Joe Burrow now over the course of his career. Pretty good list of quarterbacks there. He'll be going to Cincinnati. The Bengals did lose Jesse Bates. They lost Von Bell. Hayden Hurst went from Cincinnati to Carolina. The Steelers ended up signing Patrick Peterson. They re-signed Larry Ogunjobi. They signed Cole Holcomb. The Browns have had a decent offseason. They got Dalvin Tomlinson. They got Juan Thornhill as safety, so they address needs too. I mean, the Ravens, Q, on paper, like we're looking strictly on paper, the Ravens, as of this recording, they're a worse team than when they started because they haven't signed anyone, and they got rid of Calais Campbell. So that by default means they're a worse team on paper. But with the AFC North, Q, how are you liking what those teams did, and what does that mean for Baltimore?
Yeah, I think there's this surge of confidence over in Cincinnati. And then obviously you look at Orlando Brown Jr., who signs that fat contract with that guaranteed money. My God, what do they call it? Paycor is the name of their stadium now. They needed some money, and they went quickly away from Paul Brown. And all right, now we're gonna go ahead and name this stadium. Give us the money. I know this that to win the offseason, for years it was the Cleveland Browns who won it, and they won it in big time fashion. Ultimately, we saw what happened when it came to the losses and all that, and really from a bigger picture of things, I think you got to play the game in the regular season. Sure, the Bengals have retooled, no question about it. Pittsburgh's been kind of quiet. I know they're trying to look for that linebacker to fill that role that really they hadn't had that kind of a guy since Ryan Shazier went down with an injury. But you look at, Cleveland. I guess Cleveland is trying to figure out how to rework even Deshaun Watson's contract and do some things with that maneuvering. Ultimately, though, Kevin, I just know this offseason is one of the most unique off seasons ever, with a lot of not just AFC North, but a lot of like just the landscape of football, how it's going to look when it comes to this guaranteed money look, because we saw it with whether it be Darius Slay, whether it be Orlando Brown Jr. We saw it with a couple of other free agents. They all were getting these different guaranteed money deals, and that's, man. I mean, we're seeing total guarantees try to be buffered, but you could see where guys are getting larger guarantees, and I think that this is a turning point. It really is. The bigger picture is this is a turning point this year, this offseason, unlike any other season before.
Yeah, the Ravens face their fork in the road too here with whether it is an extension for Lamar, whether they trade him, whether he plays on the franchise tag. Plenty of different paths the Ravens can go down here, but still time to save the offseason. Still time to save the offseason as the Ravens end up, again, not doing too much over the first couple of days, but Q, I appreciate you hopping on here talking with me, and there is one move they could make, and that is Devonta Freeman. That could save their offseason. And one fell swoop, bringing in Devonta Freeman and making him a four-headed monster. J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards, Justice Hill, and Devonta Freeman.
I'm not even gonna say anything. I'm just not. Greg Roman is no longer here, so Devontae probably is gonna be like, I'm gonna wait till Greg signs with somebody. Then I'm gonna go ahead and offer my services because Devonta Freeman exceeds really well when it comes to Greg Roman's offense.
I'm telling you, Devonta Freeman is a Ravens legend. Darius Slay, also a Ravens legend for about 4 hours there too. So we'll see. Again, plenty of moves the Ravens still can make here. I appreciate you, Q. For more of our show, be sure to subscribe on YouTube, follow along in audio form for free. It's the same show, both audio and video, 5 days per week. But that's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Coming up on Monday when we get back here, we'll be diving in to a post-free agency, post-first week of free agency mock draft Monday. So be sure to stay tuned for that, and I will see you right back here on Monday.